I never meant for it to happen this way. Well, maybe that's not entirely true. Maybe I wanted some of it. The power, the control, the satisfaction of finally stepping out of Daniel's shadow. But the mess it became, the chaos, that I hadn't planned for. It all started with an idea. 4 years I stood by Daniel's side as we built Ember and Oak from the ground up. Our restaurant. Our dream. But in reality it had never been ours. It was his. His vision, his rules, his final say. I handled the decor, the menu planning, the front-of-house charm that made guests feel like royalty. But Daniel? He was the foundation. The chef. The one the investors respected, the one the staff feared. And when he spoke, my voice didn't matter. Not anymore. I had convinced myself for years that I was fine with it. That I didn't need the credit, the authority. But when Daniel left for a 6-week business trip to scout locations for our big expansion, something in me snapped. That's when I started really listening to Jason. Jason had been with us for a year. He was sharp, confident, and most importantly, he saw me. Not as Daniel's wife, not as the co-owner in name only, but as the real brain behind our success. You could run this place without him, Jason had told me one night after a long shift. His voice low and smooth as we lingered in my office. You already do. I remember laughing, shaking my head. But something about the way he said it, the way he looked at me, it planted a seed. And soon I started wondering, what if he's right? What if I don't need Daniel? What if the restaurant, the empire we built, should be mine? It wasn't an impulsive decision. It took planning, strategy, patience. First, I started making small changes. I adjusted the menu, tweaked the pricing, restructured the staff schedules. All things Daniel would have argued about for weeks. But with him gone, there was no one to challenge me. And when I saw the numbers rise, when I watched guests rave about the new dishes, the improved service, I knew I was doing what Daniel had always failed to. Then came the bigger step. Jason. I'd been flirting with him for months, long before Daniel left. It was harmless at first, just a game. But the night I let him kiss me, really kiss me, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just about the thrill of infidelity. It was about control. Daniel had always been the dominant one in our marriage. The decision maker. The leader. But with Jason I was in control. And when he whispered in my ear, "You could do this without him," I realized I wanted more than just Jason in my bed. I wanted him in Daniel's place. I made the call official 2 weeks before Daniel's return. It was easy. Too easy. A signed agreement shifting executive power in the company. A few well-timed conversations with our investors, feeding them doubts about Daniel's ability to lead the expansion. Jason stepping up as the new CEO, seamlessly filling the role I had molded him for. And then the final touch, the phone call. I had been looking forward to it. I pictured Daniel's face the moment he walked into the restaurant, expecting to reclaim his throne, only to find Jason sitting in his chair. I imagined the way his hand would tighten around his phone, how his voice would strain when he called me. And when he did, when I heard the disbelief in his voice, the devastation, I laughed. "He is more competent than you. You're fired. Leave now." Silence. Then a click. I stared at my phone for a long time after the call ended. Jason's hand on my hip, his lips tracing my neck in silent celebration. It was done. I had won. Or so I thought. 3 months later, the calls wouldn't stop. First, I ignored them. Then I started to worry. And then I realized I may have made a terrible mistake. The first time Jason mentioned that we had a problem, I brushed him off. "The numbers are fine," I told him, sipping my morning coffee as I skimmed through the restaurant's latest reviews. "Reservations are still booked solid through next month. Whatever it is, handle it." Jason didn't look convinced. He stood across from me in my office, arms crossed, the cocky smirk I had once adored replaced with something tighter. "We lost 3 investors this week, Claire." That made me look up. 3. I set my coffee down, my stomach twisting. Yep. And that's on top of the 2 that dropped last month. Jason leaned against my desk, watching me. "We can't afford to lose another." I frowned, trying to process this. The restaurant had been thriving, at least as far as I knew. Our menu changes had brought in fresh clientele. Our marketing push had worked. And despite some minor setbacks, Ember and Oak was supposed to be doing better without Daniel. So why was our support structure crumbling? I reached for my laptop, pulling up our financial reports, but before I could dig into them, my phone buzzed. Daniel. I let it ring, ignoring the way Jason's eyes flickered toward the screen. He didn't like that Daniel had been calling me lately. First, I thought it was just to gloat. Some pathetic attempt to make me second-guess myself. I refused to answer him, but the calls kept coming. 3 times last week. Twice yesterday. And now again. Jason reached across the desk and flipped my phone over, silencing it. He's just messing with you, he said. Ignore him. I nodded, but I couldn't shake the unease curling in my stomach. Daniel wasn't the type to play mind games. He was the type to retaliate. And I was starting to wonder what exactly he had planned. That night after Jason left, I stayed late to review the books. I needed to see the numbers for myself to figure out why we were suddenly bleeding investors. Maybe there had been a shift in the industry, or maybe one of our competitors had stepped up their game. But as I scrolled through the financial reports, something felt off. Then I saw it. The contracts. The investors who had left weren't just pulling out, they were moving to another restaurant. One that had quietly opened on the other side of town. One that wasn't on my radar. And when I found the name of the owner, my breath caught in my throat. Daniel Carter. I sat there frozen, staring at the screen as the pieces started falling into place. While I had been celebrating my victory, while I had been reveling in the power I thought I had stolen, Daniel had been rebuilding. He hadn't fought for Ember and Oak back. He hadn't tried to win over investors or challenge my leadership. He had built something new. And now, one by one, the people who had once backed our restaurant were shifting their loyalty to his. My phone buzzed again. I didn't need to check to know who it was. This time I picked up. Daniel's voice came through the line, steady and calm. Did you really think I'd just walk away? I swallowed hard, gripping the phone. What the hell are you doing? What you should have done, he said. Building something that actually lasts. My nails dug into my palm. You stole my investors. You stole my restaurant, he corrected. I just gave them something better. A lump formed in my throat. I had spent months convincing myself I had one. That Jason and I had built something greater than what Daniel and I ever could. But if that was true, why were we losing? What do you want? I finally asked, my voice quieter now. Daniel chuckled, low and dark. Nothing, he said. Not yet anyway. I just wanted to see how long it would take for you to realize you made a mistake. I hung up on him, my hands trembling. Because for the first time I started to think he might be right. I barely slept that night. Daniel's voice echoed in my head long after I hung up the call. You made a mistake. No. I refused to believe it. He was trying to rattle me, to shake my confidence, to make me question everything I had built with Jason. But I wouldn't let him. Daniel was out of Ember and Oak. He was nothing now. No title, no power, no claim to our success. And yet, he had built something else. And worse, people were following him. By morning, my irritation had turned into something sharper. Something more urgent. I stormed into my office and slammed the financial reports onto my desk. Jason, who had been scrolling through his phone, barely looked up. We need to talk, I snapped. Jason stretched lazily. Good morning to you too. I'm serious, I said, throwing the papers in front of him. Look at this. He sighed and picked them up, skimming through. I watched as his smirk slowly faded. The investors, he muttered, flipping to the last page. All of them went to him? Not just investors, I said, leaning over the desk. Staff too. Jason's head snapped up. What? I pointed to the employee reports. 3 line cooks, 1 sous chef, and 2 of our best servers quit last week. Guess where they are now? Jason scowled. I let the silence stretch. He wasn't taking this seriously enough. You told me we didn't need Daniel. I continued, my voice dangerously low. You said I could run this place without him. That we could. Jason sat back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. And we can. I scoffed. We're bleeding money, Jason. He waved a hand dismissively. It's a rough patch. Investors are fickle. They'll come crawling back once they see his place crash and burn. But that wasn't what I had seen. The reports, the contracts, the trend, it all told me something different. Daniel wasn't struggling. He was thriving. By noon, frustration had turned to anger. I needed answers. Now. I left Jason in the office and headed to the kitchen. The place was buzzing with lunch prep, but something felt off. The energy wasn't the same as before, the efficiency was lacking. Orders were slower, plates weren't coming out as quickly. And the staff? They were restless. It was subtle, but I saw it. The way they avoided my gaze, the way conversations died when I walked by. I grabbed one of the senior servers, Lauren, by the arm as she rushed past. "What's going on?" I asked. She hesitated. "What do you mean?" "This." I gestured around the kitchen. The tension. The slower service. People leaving. Lauren bit her lip, looking anywhere but at me. "Lauren." She sighed. "Look, Claire, people are worried." "About what?" I demanded. She hesitated again, then lowered her voice. "Daniel." I stiffened. She glanced around, then leaned in. "Some of the staff have been checking out his place," she admitted. "And well." I folded my arms. "Spit it out." "They like it," she said. "A lot. He's paying better, giving better shifts, and it just feels different there. Like he actually cares." I sucked in a breath. Daniel wasn't just taking my investors. He was taking my people. I stormed back to my office, heart pounding in my chest. Jason was lounging in his chair, feet propped up on the desk, scrolling through his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. I slammed the door behind me. "We have a problem." Jason finally looked up. "What now?" I marched toward him. "Daniel is poaching our staff. He's paying better, treating them better. We're losing people." Jason shrugged. "So? We'll hire new ones." I stared at him, waiting for him to get it. When he didn't, my hands curled into fists. "This isn't a joke, Jason. We don't just need warm bodies, we need the best. And Daniel is taking them." Jason groaned, rubbing his face. "Jesus, Claire, you're letting him get into your head." I exhaled sharply. "Maybe if you took this seriously, we wouldn't be in this mess." That got his attention. His eyes darkened as he sat up. "Excuse me." "You heard me." I crossed my arms. "You convinced me to put you in charge, to kick Daniel out. You told me we'd be better off. But now we're barely holding on, and all you do is sit there acting like it's nothing." Jason's jaw clenched. "I'm handling things." "No, you're not," I shot back. "You don't even see what's happening, do you? Daniel isn't just competing with us, he's winning." Jason let out a humorless laugh. "Winning? Claire, it's been 3 months. You really think he can just replace everything we built overnight?" I stared at him, and in that moment I saw it. He doesn't get it. He never had. Daniel wasn't replacing what we built. He was making something better. And suddenly, for the first time since this all started, I wondered if I had backed the wrong man. That night, I did something I swore I wouldn't. I drove across town. Daniel's restaurant, the Foundry, was in full swing when I pulled into the parking lot. It was packed. The line wrapped around the entrance, guests waiting patiently as soft lighting illuminated the name above the doors. And the moment I stepped inside, my heart sank. It was perfect. Warm, sophisticated, the kind of place that made you want to stay. The air smelled like slow-roasted meats and fresh herbs, the sound of satisfied conversation filling the space. Then I saw him. Daniel stood behind the bar, sleeves rolled up, effortlessly charming a group of customers as he poured a drink. He looked happy, relaxed, like a man who wasn't just surviving without me. He was thriving. And then, as if sensing my presence, his eyes met mine. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then slowly Daniel smirked. Not a cruel smirk. Not smug. Just knowing. Like he had been waiting for me to realize it. I turned and walked out, my stomach twisting. I had come here expecting to see him struggling. Instead, I had just seen my worst nightmare come to life. That I drove home in silence. Jason had called twice, but I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not after what I had just seen. The Foundry wasn't some half-baked revenge scheme. Some desperate attempt to prove he could survive without me. No, Daniel had built something real. Something thriving. Something better than what I had. And worst of all, he had done it without me. The truth settled in my stomach like poison. I had spent months convincing myself that Daniel would fail. That he needed me, that Ember and Oak was the only thing keeping him relevant. But I had been wrong. So wrong. When I walked into the house, Jason was waiting for me. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded. I tossed my purse onto the counter and exhaled. I went to see it. Jason frowned. See what? The foundry. That made him pause. His expression flickered, annoyance, disbelief, then something else. Something uncertain. He scoffed. Why would you do that? Because I needed to see it for myself, I snapped. And guess what, Jason? It's better than Ember and Oak. He's not just poaching our investors. He's giving them something worth investing in. Jason crossed his arms, shaking his head. You're overreacting. Am I? I grabbed my phone, pulling up the financial reports. Tell me, when exactly were you planning to mention that our reservations have dropped by 15%? Or that last week's earnings were our lowest in 6 months? Jason's jaw tightened. Yeah, that's what I thought. You knew, I accused, my voice rising. You knew we were slipping, and you didn't say a word. Jason ran a hand through his hair. Look, Claire. No. I cut him off. You look. I handed you the keys to my restaurant. I trusted you to make it work. And now we're standing here watching everything fall apart, while Daniel is out there running a full goddamn empire. Jason's expression darkened. Your restaurant, he sneered. I didn't back down. Yes. Mine. I built it before you even stepped foot in it. Jason let out a cold, humorless laugh. Wow. So that's how it is, huh? He shook his head. Our wife made me the CEO, remember? He spat the words mockingly, throwing them back in my face. But now that things are tough, suddenly it's your restaurant again? His words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. But I refused to let him see that. Because deep down I knew. He wasn't angry because I blamed him. He was angry because I was right. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind a hurricane of thoughts. I had been so sure that Daniel was the problem. That he was holding me back, that Ember and Oak would be better with Jason in charge. But now? Now I saw the truth. Daniel wasn't the problem. Jason was. Jason had talked a big game, promised me everything I wanted to hear. He had told me I could run the restaurant without Daniel, that I was the real reason for its success. But it was all bullshit. Jason wasn't a leader. He wasn't a businessman. He was just a smooth talker. He had convinced me to destroy the one thing keeping us afloat. And now I was paying for it. By the next morning I had made my decision. I needed to fix this. I needed to do what I should have done months ago. I picked up my phone. And I called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. Claire, he said, his voice neutral. Calm. I exhaled. We need to talk. Silence. Then oh? About what? I gritted my teeth. He was enjoying this. You know what? A pause. Then Daniel chuckled softly. So, it's finally sinking in, huh? I swallowed my pride. Daniel, can we meet? I expected him to gloat, to rub my failure in my face. But instead he simply said, I'll think about it. And then he hung up. I stared at my phone. He had hung up on me. I clenched my fists, my entire body vibrating with frustration. Daniel had never hung up on me before. He had never been the one to walk away from a conversation first. But now I was the one chasing him. And I hated it. But I needed him. Because if I didn't fix this soon, I was going to lose everything. Daniel didn't call back. Not that day. Not the next. Not even by the end of the week. And with every silent hour that passed, my anxiety tightened around my chest like a vice. Jason didn't seem to care. He was still pretending everything was fine, that we weren't watching Ember and Oak crumble in real time. But I felt it. Every shift in the kitchen, every half-empty reservation slot, every side-eyed glance from the staff. It was slipping through my fingers, and I was running out of time to stop it. By the second week I snapped. I showed up at the foundry. I don't know what I expected, to catch Daniel off guard? To corner him into a conversation? To remind him that he needed to hear me out? But the second I stepped inside, I knew I had made a mistake. It was packed. The kind of busy we hadn't seen at Ember and Oak in months. The air buzzed with warm conversation, laughter blending seamlessly with the hum of soft jazz playing in the background. The kitchen was moving like a well-oiled machine, seamless, efficient. The servers walked with purpose, their trays full, their faces happy. And then I saw Daniel. He was behind the bar again, just like the last time, talking to customers, pouring drinks with practiced ease, That same confident ease he had always carried when he knew everything was under control. When he looked up and saw me, he didn't even look surprised. He smirked. And that sent white-hot anger flashing through my veins. I stormed up to the bar, ignoring the curious glances from nearby guests. "We need to talk," I said. Daniel didn't stop what he was doing. He calmly poured a drink, slid it across the counter to a customer, wiped his hands on a cloth, and then looked at me. "Do we?" I clenched my jaw. "Yes." He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the counter. "See, Claire, I don't think we do." My nails dug into my palms. "Daniel, you fired me," he said, cutting me off. "Remember? Told me I wasn't needed anymore." He tilted his head, his expression almost amused. "So why exactly are you here?" I exhaled sharply, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Because Ember and Oak is failing." Daniel finished for me. I swallowed. His smirk deepened. "Yeah, I know." Heat burned in my cheeks. "You don't have to be an ass about it." "I'm not," he said smoothly. "I'm just wondering. Why would I help you, Claire? Why, after everything you pulled, should I give you anything?" I hated the way he was looking at me. So calm, so unbothered, so in control. Because that had always been my thing. I was the one who handled things, who knew how to manipulate, how to charm, how to bend situations in my favor. But not with him. Not anymore. And that terrified me. I forced a breath. "Look," I said, lowering my voice. "I made a mistake." Daniel raised an eyebrow. I swallowed my pride. "Jason, he's not who I thought he was." That, Daniel actually chuckled. "No shit." I ignored the jab. "Ember and Oak is sinking. Investors are backing out. The staff is leaving. And I can't fix it alone." Daniel's gaze flickered, something unreadable passing through it. For a brief second I thought maybe I was getting through to him. Then he sighed and shook his head. "Not my problem." My stomach dropped. "What?" Daniel straightened, grabbing a glass and polishing it with infuriating ease. "I moved on, Claire." He gestured around him. "I built this. And it's working." I stared at him, panic clawing up my throat. "Daniel, tell me something." He set the glass down, looking at me again. "Why did you call me last week?" I blinked. "What? Why?" His voice was calm. "Did you call me because you regretted what you did? Or did you call me because you realized Jason was a mistake?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Daniel nodded like he already knew the answer. "That's what I thought." I clenched my fists. "Daniel, please." For the first time in months I heard myself. I never begged. But now? I sounded desperate. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're only here because you're losing," he said quietly. "Not because you miss me. Not because you want me back. But because you need me to clean up your mess." I flinched. Daniel exhaled, then shook his head. "I'm done, Claire." A lump formed in my throat. "Daniel, please." He met my gaze, steady and unwavering. Then he walked away. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just calmly. Like he had made peace with it all. And that was somehow so much worse. I stood there, frozen, my entire body numb. Then slowly I turned and walked out of the foundry. And for the first time since I betrayed Daniel, I realized that I might actually lose everything. I didn't go back to Ember and Oak that night. I couldn't. Not after the way Daniel had looked at me. Like I was nothing. Like I wasn't even worth his anger. I had expected gloating. I had braced for cruelty, for a smug "I told you so." But instead he had just dismissed me. Like I had already lost. Like I wasn't even worth fighting anymore. That was worse than hatred. Worse than revenge. It was indifference. And for the first time I felt it. I had truly finally lost him. I spent the night drinking wine alone in the dark. Jason called 3 times. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't want to hear his excuses. Didn't want to look at him. Didn't want to admit to him that I had failed. But deep down I knew what had to happen next. Jason had to go. By the next morning I had made up my mind. I walked into Ember and Oak with my head high, my heels clicking against the polished floors. The restaurant was open for brunch, but the energy was wrong. The staff looked tired. The kitchen was moving slower. The tables weren't as full as they used to be. And Jason? Jason was sitting in my office, feet propped up on my desk, scrolling through his phone like he had all the time in the world. I slammed the door behind me. He didn't even flinch. "Well, look who decided to come home," he muttered, still staring at the screen. I crossed my arms. "We need to talk," he sighed, setting his phone down. "Jesus, Claire. Again." "Yes. Again." I stepped forward. "Because I'm done pretending this is working." Jason smirked. "You had that talk with Danny boy, huh?" My jaw tightened. Jason saw it. And for the first time I saw something in his eyes, uncertainty. He knew. He knew things were slipping, and he knew he had no way to stop it. But unlike me, Jason didn't have a backup plan. All he had was me. And that meant, for the first time since this started, I had the upper hand. I sat down across from him, folding my hands neatly on the desk. "You're out." Jason blinked. "Excuse me." "You're out," I repeated, my voice steady. "You're done. You're not CEO anymore." Jason laughed. "Like hell I'm not." I smiled thinly. "You don't have a choice." His amusement flickered. "Claire, the investors are leaving because of you, Jason." I cut him off. "Not Daniel. You." Jason's jaw twitched. "You promised me we'd be better without him," I continued. "But you haven't done a damn thing. You sit in this office, you talk big, but you don't do anything. And now? This restaurant is dying." Jason scoffed. "And that's my fault?" "Yes." The word landed like a slap. Jason sat up straighter. "Oh, come on, Claire. Don't pretend this is all on me. You wanted this. You chose this." I tilted my head. "Yeah. And now I'm fixing it." Jason's face darkened. And for the first time I saw it. The cracks in the confidence. The fear. Jason had talked a big game when he thought I was wrapped around his finger. When he thought I would always choose him. But now? Now he knew better. I leaned forward. "Pack your things." Jason stared at me. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." His smirk returned, but it was forced now, brittle. "And what, exactly, are you going to do without me?" I stood, adjusting my blazer. "I'll figure it out." Jason scoffed. "Oh, please." He shook his head. "You think Daniel's gonna come running back to you? You think he's gonna save you?" I stiffened. Jason saw it. And then he laughed. "Oh my God." He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "You really think he's gonna take you back?" I clenched my jaw. Jason grinned, shaking his head. "Claire, baby. You burned that bridge. Hell, you blew it up." He leaned forward, voice lowering. "Daniel's done with you." My nails dug into my palm. "Get out." Jason's grin didn't fade. But he did stand. Slowly. He grabbed his phone, his wallet. Then as he passed me, he leaned in. Just enough for his breath to brush my ear. "You're all alone now, Claire." Then he walked out. The moment the door shut behind him, I let out a shaky breath. My hands were trembling. My heart was pounding. But I had done it. Jason was gone. Now I just had to figure out what the hell came next. By the afternoon, I had drafted a letter to the investors, promising immediate changes in leadership. I fired 2 of Jason's useless hires, restructured the staff, and started calling every contact I had to convince them Ember and Oak wasn't a lost cause. But it wasn't enough. The damage was already done. And by the end of the day I had gotten the final crushing news. One of our biggest investors, our last real safety net, was pulling out. The words sat on the screen of my laptop, mocking me. I closed my eyes. Exhaled. I didn't have a choice anymore. I needed Daniel. And this time, I wasn't asking. I picked up my phone. And I called him. Again. It rang twice before he answered. I swallowed. "Daniel." "No." I blinked. "What?" Daniel's voice was calm. Steady. "No, Claire." I gripped the phone tighter. "Daniel, just listen." "I did," he said. "I listened. I gave you the chance to talk. And you still chose him." I flinched. Daniel exhaled softly. "I don't owe you anything, Claire." I opened my mouth, then shut it. 'Cause I knew he was right. Silence stretched. And then, Daniel sighed. "But I might owe something to Ember and Oak." My breath caught. "What does that mean?" I asked carefully. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then finally, "Meet me tomorrow," he said. We'll talk. Click. The line went dead. I stared at my phone. I had done it. I had a chance. A real chance to fix everything. But something about Daniel's voice, something about the way he had said it, told me this wasn't going to be the kind of help I wanted. No. This was going to be something else entirely. I barely slept. The weight of everything pressed down on me like a stone, making it impossible to rest. The restaurant. The investors. Jason's smug parting words. And Daniel. Daniel, who had agreed to meet. But the way he had said it. I don't owe you anything, but I might owe something to Ember and Oak. That wasn't an olive branch. That was a warning. I wasn't walking into a reunion. I was walking into his terms. And deep down I knew I wouldn't like them. By noon I was sitting in the foundry, hands curled around a glass of water, watching the door like a nervous wreck. Daniel made me wait. It was deliberate, I knew. He had always been punctual before, always respected my time, but now he was showing me just how little control I had left. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. And then finally, he arrived. Daniel walked in like he owned the place, which of course he did. He moved with that quiet confidence that had always set him apart, that effortless composure that made people listen when he spoke. And when his eyes landed on me, there was no warmth, no affection, just quiet calculation. He sat across from me, folding his hands on the table. Claire. I swallowed. Daniel. He leaned back slightly, glancing around the restaurant. You know, he mused. This is the first time you've actually sat in the foundry. Took you long enough. I clenched my jaw. You didn't exactly invite me. He smirked. Didn't need to. You were always going to come. And just like that, I felt the control slip further from my grasp. Because he was right. I was always going to come. I had no choice. I took a breath. You said we could talk. Daniel tilted his head. I did. I exhaled slowly. I need your help, Daniel. He didn't react. Didn't blink. Just waited. I swallowed my pride. Ember and Oak is failing. The investors are gone. The staff is leaving. Jason was a mistake and I paused, forcing myself to continue. I was wrong. Daniel's gaze didn't waver. Go on. I hated this. Hated how he was making me say it all. But I pushed forward. You were right, I admitted. About Jason. About the restaurant. About... My throat tightened. About everything. The words tasted like poison. But Daniel just nodded like he already knew. So, he said casually, you want me to come back and fix it for you? I flinched. He leaned forward slightly. You want me to clean up your mess? Save the restaurant? Save you? I inhaled sharply. Yes. Silence. Daniel studied me, tapping his fingers lightly against the table. Then finally he sighed. All right. My stomach dropped. I hadn't expected him to say yes so easily. There had to be a catch. And I was right. Because then Daniel smiled, cold, sharp, calculated. I'll help you, he said. But on one condition. I held my breath. What is it? Daniel's smirk deepened. I own Ember and Oak now. The words slammed into me like a wrecking ball. I blinked. What? You heard me, Daniel said smoothly. I take full ownership. Full control. You sign it over to me and then I fix it. I stared at him, heart pounding. You want me to just give it to you? He shrugged. You already lost it, Claire. I'm just doing what needs to be done. My fingers curled into fists. That restaurant is mine. Daniel arched an eyebrow. Is it? I opened my mouth, then closed it. Because I had no argument. The truth was right there, undeniable. I had already lost everything. Daniel was just collecting his prize. I forced myself to stay calm. And what happens to me? Daniel smiled again. That depends. On what? He leaned forward, his voice lowering. On how useful you are. I stiffened. Daniel exhaled. You want the truth, Claire? I didn't. But he gave it to me anyway. I don't need you, he said bluntly. Not anymore. Not for the restaurant, not for my career, not for anything. My throat felt tight. Daniel continued. But Ember and Oak deserves better than to die because of your mistakes. So I'll take it back. I'll fix it. And maybe I'll let you stay. My nails dug into my palm. As what? An employee? Daniel smirked. I inhaled sharply. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm dead serious. He tilted his head. After all, our wife fired me. Thought I was useless. His voice lowered. So tell me, Claire, how does it feel? I looked away, my cheeks burning with humiliation. He let the silence stretch, enjoying my discomfort. Then finally he sat back. Think about it, he said casually. Let me know when you're ready to sign. And with that he stood, walked away, and left me there, drowning in the consequences of my own choices. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes. Hours. But eventually I picked up my phone, and I called the investors, one by one. And when they asked what was happening to Ember and Oak, I gave them my answer. A bitter, broken whisper. Daniel owns it now. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember unlocking the front door, or pouring myself a drink, or staring blankly at the wall as the ice melted in my untouched glass. All I remember is his voice. You already lost it, Claire. I'm just doing what needs to be done. I had walked into that meeting thinking I could fix everything, that I could convince Daniel to save Ember and Oak while I still had some shred of power left. But I had miscalculated. Because Daniel hadn't just been waiting for me to come crawling back. He had been planning for it, setting the pieces in place. And now the final piece, me, had just fallen exactly where he wanted it. The next morning I met with my lawyer. She didn't look surprised when I told her I was signing over the restaurant. You don't have much of a choice, she said simply, flipping through the contract Daniel had sent over. The investors are pulling out. The debts are piling up. If you don't do this, Ember and Oak will collapse completely in a matter of weeks. I swallowed hard. I know. Her gaze softened slightly. Claire, I have to ask, are you sure about this? No, not even a little. But I nodded anyway. She sighed and slid the paperwork across the table. Then let's make it official. Signing my name felt like swallowing glass. With every stroke of the pen, I felt the last piece of control slip through my fingers. And then just like that it was done. Daniel Carter was now the sole owner of Ember and Oak. And I was nothing. I didn't hear from him for 3 days. No calls. No emails. No instructions on what was supposed to happen next. The silence was suffocating. I had been bracing for his gloating, for the smug victory speech I knew he had been dying to throw in my face. But instead there was nothing. It made the humiliation worse. Because it meant he wasn't just taking what was mine. He was taking his time with it. On the 4th day I finally received an email. Subject: Welcome back, Claire. Your employment at Ember and Oak has been reinstated under new management. You'll report to me directly. Your new role: Assistant General Manager. Salary to be determined. Dress code: professional. No exceptions. If you have a problem with any of the above, feel free to decline the offer. But given your current financial situation, I doubt you will. See you Monday. Daniel. I stared at the screen, my hands gripping the edges of my desk. Assistant General Manager. At my restaurant. Answering to him. Monday came too fast. I wanted to skip it. I wanted to ignore the email, to pretend I had options, that I wasn't completely at his mercy. But Jason had drained most of our reserves before I kicked him out, and my savings were nearly gone. I needed this job, and Daniel knew it. So I dressed the part, sleek, professional, composed. And I walked through the doors of Ember and Oak as if I hadn't just sold my soul to the devil. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the shift. The restaurant was already changing under Daniel's control. The tension that had hung over the staff for months was gone. Conversations flowed easier. The kitchen ran smoother. And the worst part? They were relieved he was back. I caught whispers as I walked through the dining area. It already feels different, doesn't it? I heard he's restructuring everything. Thank God. Honestly, it's probably for the best. Every word stung like a fresh wound. I was the problem. I had been the problem all along. Daniel was waiting for me in his office. My office? No, not anymore. It was his now. And he looked comfortable there. Sitting behind the desk like he had never left. Flipping through paperwork like he had always been in charge. He barely glanced up as I entered. You're late. I stiffened. Save it. he said, waving a hand dismissively. I don't have time for excuses. Heat flared in my chest. I was 2 minutes late. His gaze lifted, sharp and unreadable. And yet, you knew I'd notice. I clenched my jaw. Of course he noticed. Daniel had always noticed everything. He set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. Here's how this is going to work, Claire. You're going to do exactly what I tell you. You're going to follow my rules. My vision. No more shortcuts. No more bad decisions. No more ego getting in the way of what's best for this restaurant. His voice was calm, controlled. But the underlying message was clear. No more of you getting in my way. I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. Fine. Good. He gestured to a folder on the desk. Your new responsibilities are outlined here. Read it. Learn it. Memorize it. Because if you mess up even once, I won't hesitate to replace you. My fingers twitched, but I kept them at my sides. Understood. Daniel tilted his head slightly. Say it properly. I inhaled sharply. Understood, sir. His lips twitched just slightly, like he was enjoying this, like he had been waiting for this moment. Then he nodded. Dismissed. I turned and walked out without another word. And as I closed the door behind me, one thought ran through my mind. I didn't just lose the restaurant. I lost myself. And now I belong to him. I used to walk into Ember and Oak like I owned the place. Because I did. Now every step I took inside these walls felt like a slow, humiliating descent into my own personal hell. I wasn't the boss anymore. I wasn't even respected. I was just another employee. And the worst part? The staff was thriving without me in charge. They didn't see me as their leader anymore. They saw me as the woman who almost destroyed the place. The woman who let a liar like Jason run things into the ground, while Daniel was out there building something better. And now Daniel was here running everything again. And I was nothing more than his assistant. The first week under Daniel's control was brutal. He made no effort to make things easier for me. If anything, he made it harder. Every task he assigned was meticulous, time-consuming, and completely beneath me. Inventory counts, schedule adjustments, payroll auditing. Every mindless, soul-crushing administrative task that I had once delegated was now shoved back onto my plate. And every time I even hesitated, he reminded me exactly where I stood. Are you struggling, Claire? He'd ask casually. Let me know if this is too much. I can always replace you. Or worse, when I did something right. He'd say nothing. Just move on like it was expected. Like I was just another cog in the machine, not the woman who had once built this place with him. By the second week I had started dreading seeing him. Because he wasn't just giving orders. He was watching me, studying me, waiting for me to crack. And the most infuriating part? I knew I was giving him exactly what he wanted. One night after closing, I stayed late to finish some invoices. Daniel was still there, of course. He always was. I could hear him moving around in the kitchen, talking with the chefs, testing recipes, like he had never left. Like this had always been his kingdom. And me? I was a ghost. I buried myself in the paperwork, trying to ignore the sound of his voice. But then suddenly he was there. Leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, watching me. You should go home. I didn't look up. I need to finish this. He hummed. Didn't realize you cared about doing things right now. I gritted my teeth. I've always cared. Daniel let out a quiet chuckle, stepping further into the room. No, Claire. You cared about being in control. There's a difference. I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to stay calm. I couldn't give him the reaction he wanted. I wouldn't. But then he moved closer, so close that I could feel his presence. I meant what I said before, he murmured. I frowned. About what? His voice dropped lower. I don't need you. My heart clenched. Because even though I had known it, hearing him say it like that, so certain, so final, it hurt. More than it should have. I finally looked up, meeting his gaze. Then why let me stay? I asked quietly. Daniel studied me for a long moment. Then he smirked. Because watching you fall apart is more satisfying than firing you. I didn't cry. Not in front of him. Not when I walked out of the office. Not even when I got home and collapsed onto my bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. But that night, for the first time in a long time, I wished I could take it all back, that I had never felt trapped before. Not when I was married to Daniel. Not even when I had schemed with Jason to take control of Ember and Oak. Back then I had options. Choices. The power to shape my own fate. But now? Now I had nothing. No restaurant. No respect. No control. And the worst part? Daniel wasn't even cruel about it. Because cruelty would mean he cared. No, he just treated me like I wasn't worth his time. Like I was nothing more than an employee who happened to share his past. That was worse than any insult he could have thrown at me. Because it meant he had won. Completely. The days blurred together. I woke up. Went to work. Did everything Daniel asked. I didn't argue. Didn't push back. Didn't give him any reason to doubt my obedience. Because I knew what he was waiting for. He was waiting for me to break. To beg for his forgiveness. To ask him if there was even the smallest chance we could go back to the way things were. But I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I might have lost everything. But I still had my pride. One evening after closing, I was cleaning up the dining room when I overheard two waitresses talking near the bar. I heard Daniel's meeting with another investor tomorrow. One of them whispered. Yeah, the other one replied. Apparently, they want to buy Ember and Oak. My heart stopped. I turned sharply. What? The two servers looked at me like I had just appeared out of thin air. The first one swallowed nervously. I mean it's just a rumor. Who? I demanded. The second server hesitated. Some hospitality group. Big money. They want to turn Ember and Oak into a franchise. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Daniel wasn't just running Ember and Oak. He was selling it. I stormed into his office without knocking. Daniel barely looked up from his laptop. You're getting bolder. You're selling the restaurant? I spat. He exhaled through his nose, closing the laptop slowly. I'm considering an offer. I clenched my fists. You can't do that. Daniel's gaze flickered with amusement. Can't? Claire, in case you forgot, you signed it over to me. It's mine now. I can do whatever I want with it. My stomach twisted. Why? His expression didn't change. Because I can. I sucked in a breath. You want to destroy me that badly? Daniel tilted his head. Destroy you? He let out a short, humorless laugh. Claire, I already did. The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. Because he was right. I had spent months trying to rebuild, trying to convince myself that I could still fix things. But Daniel had never intended to let me. This had never been about making Ember and Oak thrive again. It had been about taking it away from me completely. I swallowed hard. Please. For the first time in months my voice cracked. Daniel went still. His expression didn't change, but I saw it, the flicker of something behind his eyes. For 1 second I thought maybe he would reconsider. Then he leaned back in his chair. You should start looking for another job, Claire. My breath caught. It's over. The final blow. The last nail in the coffin. I stared at him, my vision blurring, my chest tightening. I had lost. For real this time. And Daniel? Daniel had finally gotten exactly what he wanted. I left his office without another word. Walked through Ember and Oak one last time. And then, as I stepped out into the cold night air, I realized that for the first time in my life, I had no idea where to go next.